Okay. Thank you, everybody. Hope everyone can hear me. And it's a real honor for me to be here. As Janie said, I spent 16 years on the Yankton Sioux Reservation in South Dakota, Marty/Lake Andes, South Dakota. And at present, I'm at the Dorothy Day Center and also chaplain for the women's lacrosse team and the women's field hockey team. They are very dear to me as well. But as the exhibit and the voices pointed out, the tradition of the Native Americans has been lost due to a number of factors. And I think one of the biggest factors was colonialization. When the Europeans came over, they tried to assimilate the native people into the Anglo-Saxon way of life. Now, that was a real problem because at first, as one Native American told me, we thought they weren't going to stay and they would just go back, but they ended up staying. He said, and that was a big problem. And so the problem was, like most of us, just bear with me, I don't mean to ramble like this, but basically our grandparents were immigrants. They came from another culture, but it wasn't their job to maintain that culture in Europe. So they were seeking a new life, and they readily were assimilated into the American way of life. The native people were already here. This was their culture, and so they are responsible for maintaining their culture, and they felt by assimilation they were going to lose their culture. Now, a number of these people here, the voices, I went online and listened to most of them, and Galen Drapo, one of the voices, who I knew personally, who was a holy man on the Yankton Sioux Reservation, he maintains that technology has really hurt the native people in their family life and their social life. Because family, very important to the native people, he feels technology has really destroyed the family unit. Another problem with the family unit is that the elders of years ago knew who they were, and they were comfortable with who they were, and they had respect from the community that they lived in. The community was strong. Now, the middle part of that culture was shipped off to boarding schools. So they lost a lot of their culture, language, tradition. Now you have today's generation of Native American people, especially the youth, who have, as Galen would say, no clue what is happening. And because of that, the family unit has really been fractured. Suicide rate is very high. Domestic violence against Native women is very high. And then you have the legal problems with the federal government. The FBI gets involved only when there's violent crime. And then there's a distrust of the federal government to begin with. So you have chaos. In the middle of this chaos, you have fertile ground for gangs. And the gang activity where I was living was very, very strong, because the gang activity provided a stability, leadership, discipline that the youth were not getting at home. And because of this, it's very violent at times. And so that's a real problem. And so the youth feel that they are lost because their culture has been destroyed or stripped, taken away. And so there are pockets of reservations, Pine Ridge, Rosebud, Porcupine Reservation, where the community there is trying to maintain its strength through language, tradition, and spiritual customs, which is in conflict with the modern world. And so, but the beauty of the spirituality of the native people is their oneness with the earth And I had the privilege of attending on numerous powwows. And the powwows is sacred ceremony where the dancers dance very gently on the ground, showing their respect for the earth. But at the same time, through their prayers, they feel that the sacred hoop, the circle, becomes bigger, and they honor their ancestors that have gone before them. But the problem is modern technology to some, and the modern world which they live in. The reservation lands are poor, so there's lack of income, lack of jobs, lack of family unit, and then you have, unfortunately, the school situation is not the greatest. And then where I was living, it was an open reservation, so you had the dominant culture of white people living with Native people. Part of the problem there was a lot of the Native youth would act out what they saw at home. And what I mean by that is, one day a child wakes up and there's a man in the house that was with his mother the night before, and he says, "You're not my father. Now, why are you here?" And this is what they're dealing with constantly. And so they think this is normal way of living, so when they go to school, they act out what they see at home. And so the teachers are at wit's ends, they don't know what to do. And quite frankly, some of the conversations we had with the school is, you have to really understand what's happening at home. Lack of food, lack of stability, and so these children are acting this out. And as the sadness of the whole thing is, suicide rate is very high. Unfortunately, I had to do a number of suicide funerals when I was there. And the problem with suicides is that I'm not an expert on this. I'm just telling you what the reality is. The grieving never ends because the hole of grief is never filled. It's just not natural. And so they're grieving because their culture's been stripped. They're grieving because they have lost a child to suicide. And it is very sad. But through it all, you never give up hope, and you're very hopeful. And so all I can say is that the Indian Health Service is trying their very, very best to really deal with the suicide problem, dealing with diabetes, which is rampant among the Native people, and then you have the problem of meth and alcohol addiction, which is, excuse me, is problematic in their culture, because the alcohol and drug is destroying their community. As a result of the dominant culture's influence on Native life, some of you may remember in the 1970s, the American Indian movement, AIM, became very strong, very militant, but I feel they did a lot of good for the Indian people because they made Indian people feel good about who they were and what their culture was. So they had the siege at Wounded Knee in the 1970s, where they actually took over Wounded Knee, which is near Pine Ridge. And the significance of that is because of the massacre that happened in the 1800s of women, men, and children were massacred by the 7th Cavalry in retaliation for what happened at the Little Bighorn. So the history is, it's unique, to say the least. But AIM brought a sense of pride back to the Native community. And because of the conflict that occurred, literally they were disbanded, and a lot of them have since passed away. So my experience with the Native people have been, I have deep affection for them. I love them very much. And they taught me a lot. Actually, they opened my eyes to a whole new world of spirituality, which I never encountered before. So I was always grateful for that. And so, but they are so gentle, and they are so very, very good. And what has happened to them really is a tragedy, because they are losing their culture, and there are group pockets who are trying to maintain their way of life and their culture. 2,000 years ago, the white buffalo calf woman appeared to the native people. A great light appeared to the native people in the form of a buffalo calf woman. Now, on the other side of the world, many historians say that's when the resurrection happened. So God takes different forms for different cultures. I've always maintained that was his form to this culture. Because a great light appeared, and she presented them with a way of life, with the sacred pipe, and ceremonies that went along with that, and healing, and good health. And then you fast forward, colonization comes and strips their very way of life. And the Black Hills was a very, very sacred ground for the native people, because that's where they prayed. That's where they had their ceremonies. They believed that God gave them that piece of land for their ceremonies, and the buffalo, which is very sacred to them, would run free. And that was taken away. So little by little, their culture and their way of life has been stripped. But now, through medicine, the Indian Health Service, they are slowly trying to restore their dignity of the native people. We owe them a lot. We owe them this land. We owe them the way they pray. They pray to a creator, God creator, who's open. He's not confined to a building, but he is open. And that was the thing that struck me more than anything, was they're very spiritual. They don't have a religion, but it's a spirituality that opened my eyes and my heart a lot, to be quite honest with you. So I was really thankful for that. But their spirituality is one with the earth. Everything they do is to the Creator. Every day they say the four-directional prayer, where they, north, east, south, and west. They point to that direction, and they'll just say a prayer, and then they face the next direction. And they're asking the Spirit to bless them for that day. So all I can tell you is my experience there was very uplifting. I learned more from them probably than I could give them. But just living with them and being present to them and seeing the daily struggles day to day, knowing that someone was with them and supporting them, it meant a lot to them. And it meant a lot to me because I became friends with many of them. So I hope this has been helpful in some ways, but these voices here, they tell a different story because they're from different parts of the world. But the priest there from Alaska, he's native. He's very uplifting, very positive, but he also is talking about the suicide rate among the Alaskan native people is alarmingly very, very high. And so this is a problem that I don't know what the answer is, to be quite honest with you, but I think it's their way of life has been altered, especially for those who have assimilated into mainstream society, who have gone to the city, and then you have those who have been left behind, who stay on the reservation, because that's where their family is, so they feel connected to their family. That's very important, and they feel connected to the land. So, in conclusion, I would just say, listen to the voices, enjoy the exhibit. It will give you a new perspective on Native Americans and how much we owe them. We truly owe them a lot for their spirituality and just for who they are, because they have given us so much. And so I'm just grateful that I had the opportunity to share some of my stories with you. I really enjoyed doing this, and I hope it has been beneficial. And I enjoyed my time in South Dakota with the Native people. Thank you. This cross was given to me by a Native woman before I left, and Janie took a photo of this. And basically, it's the sacred hoop, the cross in the center. The colors are of the Yankton Sioux tribe, but the hoop symbolizes the sacredness of life and how we all have a part to play in it. And so I was always very grateful for that.